During Christmas dinner, my son-in-law laughed loudly and said, "We only invited you out of politeness, right, honey?" Everyone laughed. I stood up, grabbed my purse, and left a letter next to the wine. The next day, the worst happened. Subscribe to the channel for more stories like this, and comment the city you're watching from. My name is Debbie, and I'm 64 years old. I never thought I'd be telling this story. But sometimes the people who are supposed to love you the most are the ones who hurt you the deepest. The smell of roasted turkey filled Aurora's dining room that Christmas evening. The table was set perfectly with her expensive china, the kind she only brought out for special occasions. Red and gold decorations sparkled under the chandelier, and Christmas carols played softly in the background. Everything looked picture perfect, just like Aurora always wanted it. I had driven 3 hours from my small apartment to be there. At my age, that drive wasn't easy anymore, especially with my arthritis acting up in the cold weather. But it was Christmas, and Aurora was my only child. Despite everything that had happened over the past few years, I still held on to hope that maybe this time would be different. Timothy was carving the turkey when it happened. He was telling one of his usual stories about his successful real estate business, gesturing with the carving knife like he was conducting an orchestra. Aurora hung on his every word, laughing at all the right moments. The kids, Emma and Jake, were focused on their phones under the table. "So I told the client," Timothy continued, his voice getting louder with each sentence, "if you can't afford the down payment, maybe you should be looking at trailer parks instead of my properties." Everyone laughed. Even Aurora, my own daughter, found his cruelty amusing. That's when he looked directly at me, his eyes gleaming with that familiar malicious spark I'd come to know so well over the past 8 years. "Speaking of people who can't afford things," he said, still holding the carving knife, "we only invited you here out of politeness, right, honey?" The words hit me like a physical blow. The laughter around the table grew louder. Aurora didn't just fail to defend me. She actually giggled and nodded in agreement. "Timothy, you're terrible," she said. But her tone was playful, affectionate even. Emma, who was 14, looked up from her phone for just a moment. "Grandma, why do you always look so sad?" she asked innocently. "It's Christmas." "Maybe because nobody actually wants her here," Jake, who was 16, added with a smirk that looked exactly like his father's. The room erupted in laughter again. Timothy high-fived his son across the table. Aurora just shook her head with that indulgent smile she always wore when her family was being playful. I felt something break inside my chest. Not my heart, that had been breaking slowly for years. This was something deeper, something final. It was my spirit giving up. I had raised Aurora by myself after her father died when she was only 12. I worked 2 jobs to put her through college, sold my mother's jewelry to help with her wedding, and gave up my own dreams so she could have everything she wanted. And this was how she repaid me. I stood up slowly, my legs shaking slightly. The laughter died down as everyone realized I was moving. "Where are you going, Mom?" Aurora asked, but there was more annoyance in her voice than concern. I walked to the hallway where I'd left my purse, my footsteps echoing on Aurora's expensive hardwood floors. My hands trembled as I reached into my bag and pulled out the envelope I'd prepared months ago. I had hoped I'd never need to use it, but after tonight, I knew there was no other choice. I walked back into the dining room and placed the envelope next to the wine bottle in the center of the table. The red wax seal caught the light from the chandelier. "What's that?" Timothy asked, his voice suspicious. "A Christmas gift," I said quietly. "Open it tomorrow." Aurora frowned. "Mom, what are you talking about? Why tomorrow?" I looked around the table one last time. At Timothy, who had spent 8 years making me feel unwelcome in my own daughter's life. At Aurora, who had chosen her husband's cruelty over her mother's dignity. At the grandchildren who had learned to see me as nothing more than a joke. Because by tomorrow, you'll understand exactly what you've lost tonight. I picked up my purse and coat. Timothy was already reaching for the envelope, but I shook my head. "Tomorrow," I repeated firmly. As I walked toward the front door, I heard Aurora call after me. "Mom, don't be dramatic. Come back and finish dinner." But I was already outside, breathing in the cold December air. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe freely. I got into my car and sat there for a moment, looking back at the house where warm light spilled from every window. Inside, my family was probably already laughing about my dramatic exit. They had no idea that the woman who had just walked out of their lives was not the same pushover who had walked in. As I drove away, I wondered if they would even bother to read the letter before Christmas morning. Part of me hoped they would wait, because once they opened it, everything would change forever. The drive home gave me 3 hours to think about how we'd gotten to this point. As the highway stretched endlessly ahead of me, memories flooded back like a dam had burst in my mind. Aurora hadn't always been this way. When she was young, we were incredibly close. After her father died in that car accident, it was just the two of us against the world. She would curl up next to me on the couch every night, and we'd watch old movies together. She'd tell me about her dreams of becoming a teacher, of having a family, of making me proud. "Mom," she used to say, "when I grow up, I want to be just like you. Strong and brave." Those words used to fill my heart with such warmth. Now they felt like knives. Everything changed when she met Timothy during her senior year of college. I remember the first time she brought him home. He was charming enough, I suppose, with his expensive clothes and confident smile. But there was something in his eyes that made me uncomfortable. A coldness that he hid well behind practice charm. "Mrs. Morrison," he'd said, taking my hand in both of his, "Aurora talks about you constantly. I can see where she gets her beauty." Aurora beamed with pride, but I noticed he'd let go of my hand rather quickly, as if touching me was distasteful. The changes started small. Aurora began canceling our weekly lunches because Timothy had planned something special. She stopped calling me every night because Timothy thought it was unhealthy for a grown woman to be so dependent on her mother. "He's just helping me become more independent, Mom," she'd explained when I expressed concern. "Isn't that what you want for me?" The wedding was the first real sign of what was to come. Timothy's parents spared no expense. They rented out an entire country club, hired a 5-piece orchestra, and flew in flowers from 3 different states. I felt so out of place among all that wealth and sophistication. I had saved for 2 years to buy Aurora the pearl necklace she wore that day. It had belonged to my grandmother, and I'd had it rest-strung and cleaned specially for her wedding. But when the photographer was taking family photos, Timothy's mother suggested that Aurora wear the diamond necklace they'd given her instead. "It photographs better with the dress, dear," she'd said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Aurora didn't hesitate to switch necklaces. My grandmother's pearls spent the reception in a small box in the bridal suite. After the wedding, the distance between us grew wider. Timothy's subtle comments about my simple lifestyle became more frequent. He'd make jokes about my small apartment, my older car, my clothes from department stores instead of boutiques. "Debbie," he'd say with that condescending smile, "you really should let us take you shopping sometime. Aurora could help you find some more modern pieces." Aurora would laugh along, as if her mother's appearance was something that embarrassed her. The worst part was watching Aurora transform. The sweet, caring girl who used to bring me flowers from her school garden became someone who barely tolerated my presence. She started speaking differently, adopting Timothy's pretentious vocabulary and dismissive tone. When Emma was born, I thought things might change. Surely becoming a mother herself would help Aurora remember the bond we'd once shared. I was so excited to be a grandmother, to help with the baby, to be part of this new chapter. But Timothy had other plans. He hired a professional nanny within weeks of Emma's birth, making it clear that my help wasn't needed or wanted. "We prefer to handle things ourselves," he'd said when I offered to babysit. "We have very specific methods." Aurora nodded along, as if I hadn't successfully raised her by myself. The final blow came 3 years ago when I made the biggest mistake of my life. Aurora and Timothy were struggling financially. Timothy's real estate business was going through a rough patch, and they were behind on their mortgage payments. Aurora called me crying, saying they might lose the house. Without hesitation, I sold my house, the one I'd lived in for 35 years, where Aurora had grown up, where every room held precious memories. I gave them almost every penny from the sale, keeping only enough to rent a small apartment for myself. "Mom, you're saving our family," Aurora had said through her tears. "I'll never forget this. We'll pay you back, I promise." But gratitude has a short memory in some people. Within 6 months, Timothy was making jokes about how I was downsizing in my golden years. Aurora laughed along, apparently forgetting that my downsizing had saved their house. They never paid me back. Not a single dollar. And worse, they acted as if my sacrifice had been nothing more than what any parent should do. The invitations to family gatherings became fewer and farther between. When I was included, it was always with Timothy's cruel commentary about how they were being charitable by including the elderly relative. "We really should put Mom in one of those senior communities," Aurora had said last year, not realizing I could hear her talking to Timothy in the kitchen. "She seems so lonely in that little apartment." "As long as it's not too expensive," Timothy had replied. "We've already done enough for her." Done enough for me. I had given them everything, and they thought they'd done enough for me. Sitting in my car that Christmas night, remembering all of this, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not sadness, not hurt. Those emotions had been worn away by time and repetition. What I felt was clarity. I had spent the last 8 years trying to earn my place in a family that had already decided I didn't belong. I had diminished myself, made myself smaller and smaller, hoping that if I took up less space, they might find room for me. But tonight had shown me the truth. No matter how small I made myself, no matter how much I gave, no matter how quietly I suffered their insults, I would never be welcome in the life my daughter had chosen. As I pulled into the parking lot of my apartment building, I realized something else. The woman who had walked into that Christmas dinner was gone forever. In her place was someone who had finally remembered her own worth. The phone started ringing at 7:30 the next morning. I was sitting at my small kitchen table, sipping coffee and watching the snow fall outside my window, when Aurora's name flashed across the screen. I let it ring. She called again 5 minutes later. Then again. By the fourth call, I could almost feel her panic through the phone. I knew they had opened the letter. When she called for the 6th time, I finally answered. "Mother." Her voice was sharp, cutting. Gone was any pretense of the sweet daughter I'd raised. "We need to talk. Now." "Good morning to you too, Aurora. Don't play games with me. What is this letter supposed to mean?" I took another sip of my coffee, surprised by how calm I felt. "Which part didn't you understand?" "I thought I was quite clear. The part where you say you've cut me out of your will. The part where you're leaving everything to charity. The part where you've lost your mind." I almost smiled at that. "I haven't lost my mind, dear. I've found it." There was a long pause. In the background I could hear Timothy's voice, though I couldn't make out the words. He sounded angry. "Mom, you can't be serious about this. That money is supposed to be mine. I'm your only child. And you're also a grown woman with a husband and a house and 2 children. Tell me, Aurora, what exactly have you done to deserve an inheritance?" "I'm your daughter," she practically screamed into the phone. "Are you?" I asked quietly. Because daughters don't usually allow their husbands to humiliate their mothers. Daughters don't usually laugh when their children insult their grandmothers. Daughters don't usually treat the woman who sacrificed everything for them like an unwelcome burden. Another pause. Timothy's voice got louder in the background. "Timothy wants to talk to you," Aurora said finally. "I'm sure he does. But I have nothing to say to Timothy. I have very little to say to you either, unless you're calling to apologize." "Apologize?" Her voice went up an octave. "For what?" "If you have to ask, then you've proven my point." I hung up. The phone rang again immediately. This time I didn't answer. I turned it off completely and finished my coffee in blessed silence. 2 hours later, there was a pounding on my apartment door. I looked through the peephole and saw Aurora standing in the hallway, her face red with cold and fury. Timothy stood behind her, his expression dark. I opened the door but didn't invite them in. "We need to talk," Aurora said, pushing past me into my small living room. Timothy followed, his eyes scanning my modest apartment with obvious disdain. He'd never been here before, and I could see him taking inventory of my secondhand furniture and discount store decorations. "Cozy," he said, and somehow made the word sound like an insult. "What do you want?" I asked, remaining standing while they made themselves comfortable on my couch. Aurora pulled out a copy of my letter, the one I'd spent months writing and rewriting until every word was perfect. "This," she said, waving it in the air. "This nonsense about changing your will. We know you're just upset about last night, but this is going too far. Last night was the final straw, not the beginning, I replied. I changed my will 3 months ago. Timothy leaned forward, his voice taking on that smooth, manipulative tone he used when he wanted something. Now, Debbie, let's be reasonable here. I know we sometimes joke around, but it's all in good fun. You know we love you. Do you? I asked. Tell me, Timothy, what do you love about me? He opened his mouth, then closed it again. The silence stretched uncomfortably. I love that you raised an amazing daughter, he said finally. Wrong answer, I said. You love that I paid for your house. You love that I gave up my financial security so you could keep yours. You love that I've been a convenient target for your cruelty for 8 years. Aurora stood up abruptly. That's not fair, Mom. We've always been grateful for your help. Have you? When exactly did you show this gratitude? Was it when you stopped inviting me to family dinners? Was it when you hired a nanny instead of letting me help with the babies? Was it when you laughed at Timothy's jokes about my appearance, my apartment, my car? Those were just jokes, Aurora said weakly. No, they weren't. They were systematic humiliation designed to put me in my place. And my place, according to both of you, is silent, invisible, and grateful for whatever scraps of attention you throw my way. Timothy's mask slipped then, and I saw the real man underneath. You ungrateful old woman, he snarled. We've tolerated you for years out of respect for Aurora. We've included you in family events when we could have easily left you out completely. Tolerated me, I repeated. Yes, that's exactly how it's felt. Aurora's face crumpled then, and for a moment, I saw a glimpse of the little girl she used to be. Mom, please. Don't do this. I know we haven't been perfect, but we're family. Family doesn't treat each other the way you've treated me, I said gently. Family doesn't laugh when someone they love is being hurt. But the money, Timothy said, dropping all pretense now. That money should go to your grandchildren. It should stay in the family. It will help children, I said. Just not yours. I walked to my desk and pulled out another envelope, this one thicker than the first. Since you're here, I said, you might as well know about this too. Aurora took the envelope with shaking hands. She opened it and pulled out a letter from my bank. What is this? She whispered. The children's college funds, I said calmly. I've donated them to a scholarship program for underprivileged students. Timothy shot to his feet so fast he knocked over my coffee table. You can't do that. That money was for Emma and Jake. That money was mine to do with as I pleased. And I pleased to give it to children who will appreciate education instead of taking it for granted. Aurora sank back onto the couch, the letter falling from her hands. Mom, how could you? Emma and Jake are your grandchildren. Are they? I asked. When was the last time either of them called me? When was the last time they visited without being forced? When was the last time they treated me with basic respect? They're just kids, Aurora said desperately. Emma is 14 and Jake is 16. They're old enough to know right from wrong. You've taught them that treating their grandmother like a joke is acceptable behavior. Now they'll learn that actions have consequences. Timothy was pacing now, his face purple with rage. This is ridiculous. You're punishing children because your feelings got hurt. I'm protecting myself from people who see me as nothing more than a bank account with legs, I said. And I'm ensuring that my money goes to people who will use it to build something meaningful with their lives. Aurora looked up at me with tears in her eyes. What do you want us to do? How do we fix this? I sat down across from her, feeling older than my 64 years. You can't fix this, Aurora. Some things once broken can't be repaired. You made your choice 8 years ago when you decided that Timothy's approval was more important than your mother's dignity. Now I'm making mine. But we can change, she said desperately. We can be better. No, I said quietly. You can't. Because you don't think you've done anything wrong. You think I'm being dramatic, oversensitive, unreasonable. You don't see that you've spent years slowly killing the woman who loved you more than life itself. Timothy grabbed Aurora's arm. Come on, we're wasting our time here. Let's call a lawyer. She's clearly not mentally competent to be making these kinds of decisions. I smiled then, the first genuine smile I'd felt in months. Please do call a lawyer, Timothy. I'd love for a professional to review the documentation I have of your treatment of me over the years. The recording from last night's dinner would be particularly interesting, don't you think? They both froze. You recorded us? Aurora whispered. I've been recording our interactions for 6 months now. Insurance, you might say. In case anyone questioned my mental competency. The look of pure hatred Timothy gave me in that moment told me everything I needed to know about who he really was underneath his polished exterior. You vindictive witch, he spat. No, I said, standing up and walking to the door. I'm a woman who finally remembered she has value. Now I think it's time for you to leave. They left without another word, but I knew this wasn't over. Timothy wasn't the type of man to accept defeat gracefully, especially when money was involved. As I watched their car disappear down the street, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Peace. 3 days passed in blissful quiet. I spent the time reading books I'd put off for years, organizing my small apartment, and for the first time in decades, simply enjoying my own company. I had forgotten what it felt like to wake up without the weight of someone else's expectations crushing down on me. Then Timothy showed up alone. I saw him through my window, sitting in his BMW in the parking lot for nearly an hour before he finally got out. He looked different, disheveled, desperate. His usually perfect hair was uncombed, and his expensive shirt was wrinkled. When he knocked on my door, it wasn't the aggressive pounding from 3 days ago. This was almost tentative. I opened the door but didn't step aside to let him in. Debbie, he said, and his voice was softer than I'd ever heard it. Can we talk? We have nothing to discuss, Timothy. Please. Just 5 minutes. Against my better judgment, I let him in. He sat on the edge of my couch, his hands clasped tightly together. For the first time since I'd known him, Timothy looked vulnerable. Aurora doesn't know I'm here, he said quietly. I assumed as much. He looked around my apartment again, but this time there was no disdain in his expression. Instead, he seemed to be seeing it for the first time, really seeing it. The worn furniture that was still clean and comfortable. The family photos I'd kept despite everything. The small touches that made this place a home. I've been thinking about what you said, he began. About how we've treated you. I remained silent, waiting. You're right, he said, and the words seemed to cost him something. I have been cruel to you. But Debbie, please try to understand. When I married Aurora, I felt like I was always competing with you for her attention. Competing with me? I couldn't hide my surprise. She talked about you constantly. How strong you were, how you'd raised her alone, how much she admired you. I felt like I could never measure up to this perfect mother she'd created in her mind. I sat down across from him, genuinely curious where this was going. So I started pointing out your flaws, he continued. Little things at first. Making jokes about your house being too small, your car being too old. I told myself I was just helping Aurora see that you weren't perfect, that she didn't need to feel guilty about building a life with me. And Aurora went along with it. More than went along with it. She embraced it. His voice dropped to almost a whisper. I created a monster, Debbie. I turned your daughter into someone who could laugh at your pain because I was too insecure to handle her love for you. I studied his face, looking for signs of manipulation, but all I saw was exhaustion and what might have been genuine remorse. Why are you telling me this now? He was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was barely audible. Because I've lost her. What do you mean? Aurora. I've lost her. She's been different since Christmas night. Distant. Cold. She looks at me sometimes like she's seeing me for the first time, and she doesn't like what she sees. I felt a flutter of something in my chest. Hope maybe. Or just curiosity. She came home from here 3 days ago and locked herself in our bedroom. When she finally came out, she started asking me questions. Hard questions. About why I felt the need to tear you down. About whether I'd done the same thing to other people in my life. About what kind of man I really am. He ran his hands through his hair, and I noticed they were shaking slightly. I tried to convince her that you were manipulating the situation, making us look worse than we are. But she just looked at me with these cold eyes and said, Timothy, I watched you mock my mother for 8 years. I laughed along. What kind of people does that make us? I said nothing, but my heart was racing. She's been sleeping in the guest room. She barely speaks to me. And yesterday, she went to see a lawyer. A lawyer. She thinks you might be right about the money. She wants to make sure that if we divorce, I don't get any claim to whatever inheritance you might have left her. Except there is no inheritance anymore, is there? I shook my head. Timothy laughed, but there was no humor in it. So I destroyed my marriage for nothing. I spent 8 years turning my wife against her mother, and in the end I lost them both. We sat in silence for several minutes. I found myself feeling something I never expected to feel for Timothy: pity. What do you want from me? I asked finally. I want you to forgive me, he said simply. I want you to undo what you've done with your will. And I want you to help me save my marriage. And why would I do any of that? Because despite everything, Aurora loves you. She always has. I just made her bury that love under layers of resentment and false superiority. But it's still there, Debbie. I see it when she talks about you now. She's grieving not just for the money, but for the relationship she threw away. I stood up and walked to my window. In the distance, I could see children playing in the snow, their laughter echoing off the apartment buildings. You want me to save your marriage, I said without turning around. But you destroyed mine. What? My relationship with my daughter. You systematically poisoned it for 8 years. You turned her against me, made her see me as an embarrassment, a burden. You taught my grandchildren to disrespect me. You took away the most precious thing I had, my daughter's love. I turned back to face him. Now you want me to help you keep yours? Timothy's face crumpled then, and for a moment, he looked like a lost child. I know I don't deserve it. I know I have no right to ask. But Debbie, if we get divorced, what happens to Emma and Jake? They'll be caught in the middle of this mess. They'll suffer for my mistakes. And there it was, the manipulation I'd been waiting for. Using the children as leverage. Emma and Jake will be fine, I said coolly. Children are resilient. They'll adapt to whatever new normal their parents create for them. But they need stability. They need their family intact. They needed a grandmother who felt welcome in their lives. They needed to learn respect and kindness. They needed parents who modeled those qualities instead of cruelty and disrespect. Timothy stood up abruptly, his desperation turning back into the anger I knew so well. Fine, he snapped. I tried to be reasonable. I tried to apologize. But you're just a bitter old woman who can't let go of a grudge. There it is, I said quietly. The real Timothy. The one who thinks an apology erases 8 years of systematic emotional abuse. The one who believes that admitting fault entitles him to immediate forgiveness. I came here to make things right. You came here to manipulate me into fixing the mess you created. You don't want to make things right, Timothy. You want to make things convenient for you. He stormed toward the door, then stopped and turned back to me. You know what's going to happen, don't you? Aurora's going to divorce me, and she's going to blame you for it. She's going to say that your vindictive little stunt with the will destroyed our family. And deep down she'll hate you for it. Maybe, I said calmly. But at least she'll finally see you for who you really are. And what about Emma and Jake? When they find out their college funds are gone, who do you think they're going to blame? Their father, or the grandmother who threw their future away out of spite? That one hit its mark. For a moment doubt crept in. But then I remembered Jake's smirk at the dinner table, Emma's casual cruelty, the years of being treated like a joke. They'll blame whoever their parents tell them to blame, I said. Just like they've been taught to do their entire lives. Timothy stared at me for a long moment, and I saw the exact moment he realized he'd lost. His shoulders sagged and the fight went out of him. I hope you're happy, he said quietly. I hope destroying our family was worth it. I didn't destroy your family, Timothy. I just stopped pretending it included me. After he left, I sat in my chair by the window and watched the children play until the sun went down. For the first time since Christmas night, I felt a flicker of doubt about what I'd done. But only a flicker. Some bridges once burned can't be rebuilt. And some people, once they show you who they really are, don't deserve a second chance to hurt you. 6 months after that terrible Christmas dinner, I was living a life I'd never imagined possible. It started with Margaret, my downstairs neighbor. She was a widow about my age who'd moved in a few weeks after Timothy's desperate visit. I'd seen her struggling with her groceries one afternoon, her arthritis clearly bothering her, and I'd offered to help. That's very kind of you, she'd said with a warm smile. I'm Margaret Chun. I just moved here from Portland. Debbie Morrison. Welcome to the building. We ended up having coffee in my apartment that afternoon. Margaret had a gentle way about her. A quiet strength that reminded me of the woman I used to be before I let my family drain it out of me. She listened without judgment as I told her about Aurora and Timothy, about the Christmas dinner that changed everything. Good for you, she said simply when I finished. It takes courage to choose yourself. That phrase stayed with me, choosing yourself. I'd spent so many years choosing everyone else, Aurora's happiness, Timothy's comfort, the grandchildren's approval. I'd forgotten that I was allowed to choose me. Margaret introduced me to her book club, which met every Thursday evening in the community room of our apartment complex. First, I was nervous. I hadn't socialized with anyone except family for years, and even that had been strained and uncomfortable. But these women welcomed me with open arms. There was Dorothy, a retired teacher who'd traveled to 43 countries. Helen, a former nurse who'd raised 6 children and still had energy to spare. Susan, who'd started her own catering business at 60 and was thriving. For the first time in decades, I was part of a group where my worth wasn't tied to what I could provide financially, or how much criticism I could absorb. These women liked me for who I was. You have such interesting perspectives on the books we read, Dorothy told me one evening. You should consider taking a literature class at the community college. The idea terrified and thrilled me in equal measure. I'd always loved reading, but I'd given up any intellectual pursuits when Aurora was young. There had been no time, no money, no energy for anything that wasn't directly related to survival and providing for my daughter. But now I had time. I had money. Not a fortune, but enough to live comfortably and pursue interests I'd abandoned decades ago. Most importantly, I had no one telling me that my interests were silly or impractical. I enrolled in 2 classes, American Literature and Basic Photography. The first day of literature class I felt like a fraud. I was surrounded by people half my age who seemed so confident, so sure of themselves. But Professor Williams, a kind woman in her 50s, made everyone feel welcome. Learning has no expiration date, she said during our first session. Some of our best insights come from students who bring life experience to their reading. She was right. As we discussed novels and poems, I found myself contributing in ways that surprised me. The young students might understand the technical aspects of literature, but I understood loss, sacrifice, and the complicated relationships between parents and children in ways they hadn't experienced yet. Photography was even more revelatory. I'd always been the one behind the camera at family gatherings, capturing everyone else's memories. But I'd never thought of photography as an art form, something I could pursue for my own enjoyment. Our instructor, James, was a patient man who encouraged us to find our own visual voice. Don't try to capture what you think you should see, he told us. Capture what speaks to you. I started small flowers in the community garden. The way afternoon light fell across my kitchen table, Margaret's hands as she knitted. But gradually I became bolder. I photographed the faces of my book club friends, the architecture of buildings I'd never really noticed before, the changing seasons in our small neighborhood. For my final project, I created a series I called Invisible Women, portraits of older women in everyday settings, living their lives fully and unapologetically. Professor Williams suggested I submit it to a local gallery, but I wasn't ready for that level of exposure. The photography class also led to something unexpected. Robert. He was a fellow student, a widower about my age who'd retired from engineering and was exploring artistic pursuits. Unlike Timothy, who commanded attention in every room he entered, Robert was quiet and thoughtful. He listened more than he spoke, and when he did speak, it was with genuine interest in what others had to say. I love how you see light, he told me one day as we packed up our equipment after class. Your photos have such warmth to them. We started having coffee after class, then began taking photography walks together on weekends. There was nothing romantic about it at first, just 2 people who enjoyed each other's company and shared a new hobby. But gradually I found myself looking forward to our conversations. Robert had a way of making me feel interesting, intelligent, worth listening to. When I told him about Aurora and what had happened, he didn't try to fix it or tell me I should forgive and forget. You did what you needed to do to protect yourself, he said simply. That takes strength. It had been so long since anyone had called me strong. 8 months after Christmas, Aurora called. I almost didn't answer. I'd grown comfortable in my new life, surrounded by people who valued me, pursuing interests that fulfilled me. The sharp edges of anger had worn smooth, replaced by a kind of protective indifference. But something made me pick up the phone. Mom. Her voice was small, uncertain. Hello, Aurora. I wanted to tell you something. Timothy and I are getting divorced. I sat down carefully in my favorite chair, the one by the window where I did my morning reading. I'm sorry to hear that, I said, and was surprised to find I meant it. Are you? There was a bitter laugh in her voice. I thought you'd be pleased. I'm not pleased that your marriage failed, Aurora. I'm just not surprised. Silence stretched between us. Finally, she spoke again. I've been thinking a lot about what happened, about what you said, about how we treated you. And you were right. The words came out in a rush. I let him turn me into someone I didn't recognize. I let him make me cruel to the person who loved me most. I don't know how to live with that. I felt something loosen in my chest, but I kept my voice neutral. What do you want from me, Aurora? I want to know if there's any chance you could forgive me. I want to know if we could try again. I looked out my window at the community garden where I'd spent so many peaceful mornings. Margaret was there, tending to her tomatoes. Dorothy was reading on a bench under the oak tree. This was my life now, quiet, fulfilling, free from drama and manipulation. I don't know, I said honestly. Too much has happened. Too much has been said and done. But we could try. There was desperate hope in her voice. Maybe, I said carefully. But not yet. And not on the same terms as before. What do you mean? I mean, I'm not the same person I was a year ago, Aurora. I won't be anyone's doormat again, not even yours. I have my own life now, my own friends, my own interests. If we're going to have a relationship, it will be between equals, not between a mother who gives everything and a daughter who takes it for granted. Another long silence. I understand, she said finally. Can I call you sometimes? Just to talk. You can call, I said. But I can't promise I'll always answer. After we hung up, I sat by my window for a long time thinking. The old Debbie would have rushed to comfort Aurora, would have immediately forgiven her and welcomed her back with open arms. But the old Debbie had been destroyed in that dining room on Christmas night. This new version of me, the one who took photography classes and had coffee with friends and chose herself. She was more cautious. She understood that love without respect was just another form of servitude. Maybe Aurora and I would find our way back to each other. Maybe we wouldn't. But for the first time in my adult life, I was okay with uncertainty. I had learned to be complete on my own, and that knowledge made me stronger than I'd ever been before. The phone rang again. This time it was Margaret, asking if I wanted to join her for dinner and a movie. I said yes, grabbed my jacket and stepped out into my new life. 2 years had passed since that Christmas dinner that changed everything. I was sitting in my favorite cafe, the one near the community college where I now taught a photography workshop for seniors, when I saw her. Aurora stood uncertainly in the doorway, scanning the room. She looked different, older, yes, but also somehow smaller. The confidence she'd worn like armor during her marriage to Timothy was gone, replaced by something more genuine but more fragile. Our phone conversations over the past year had been careful, distant things, brief check-ins where we shared surface details about our lives, but avoided the deeper currents that still ran between us. I told her about my classes, my friends, even about Robert, who had become a dear companion. She told me about the divorce proceedings, about starting a part-time job as a substitute teacher, about trying to rebuild her relationship with Emma and Jake. But this was the first time we'd seen each other face to face since that awful confrontation in my apartment. She spotted me and walked over slowly, as if approaching a wild animal that might bolt at any sudden movement. Mom, she said softly. Aurora. I gestured to the empty chair across from me. Would you like to sit? She sat carefully, keeping her hands folded in her lap. Up close, I could see the changes even more clearly. The expensive highlights in her hair had grown out, leaving her natural brown color with threads of gray she hadn't bothered to hide. Her clothes were nice but not designer. There were lines around her eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and difficult conversations. You look good, she said, and there was surprise in her voice. I supposed I did. I'd lost weight without trying, the result of walking more and stressing less. I'd let my hair go silver instead of fighting it with monthly colorings I couldn't afford. I wore clothes that were comfortable rather than trying to impress anyone. At 66, I finally looked like myself. Thank you. You look tired. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. I am tired. Exhausted, actually. Do you know how hard it is to rebuild your entire life when you're pushing 40? No, I said gently. But I know how hard it is to do it when you're 64. She flinched at that, as I'd known she would. Good. She needed to understand what she'd put me through. We ordered coffee and sat in silence for a while, watching the bustle of the cafe around us. Finally, Aurora spoke. Emma asked about you yesterday. Oh. She wanted to know why you don't come to her school events anymore. Why you're not in her life. Aurora's voice was steady, but I could see her hands trembling slightly. I didn't know what to tell her. You could tell her the truth. Which is that actions have consequences. That treating people badly eventually costs you their presence in your life. Aurora was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. She doesn't understand why her college fund is gone. Jake doesn't either. They blame me for losing the money somehow. I felt a twist of something in my chest. Guilt maybe, or regret. But not enough to change my mind. What have you told them? The truth. That I treated you terribly for years, and you decided you'd had enough. That the money going to charity was a consequence of my choices, not yours. I was surprised by her honesty. The old Aurora would have found a way to make herself the victim in that story. How did they take that? About as well as you'd expect. Jake called me a weak pushover for letting Timothy control our family. Emma said she was ashamed of the way she'd talked to you. Aurora's voice broke slightly. They were right to be ashamed. I taught them that disrespecting their grandmother was acceptable. What kind of mother does that make me? A mother who made mistakes, I said carefully. The question is what you plan to do about it now. I don't know. She looked directly at me then, and I saw something in her eyes I hadn't seen in years, vulnerability. I don't know how to fix any of this. I don't know how to be the person I was before Timothy. I don't even remember who that person was. I studied her face, looking for signs of manipulation, for the calculated vulnerability Timothy had taught her to use as a weapon. But all I saw was exhaustion and genuine confusion. Why are you here, Aurora? Because I miss you. The words came out in a rush. Because I've spent 2 years trying to rebuild my life, and every major decision I make, I find myself wondering what you would think. Because even after everything I did to you, you're still the strongest person I know. And I need to understand how you found the courage to walk away from us. It wasn't courage, I said quietly. It was survival. Tell me how. Her voice was urgent now. Tell me how you did it. How you started over. How you forgave yourself for all the years you wasted. I looked at this woman across from me, my daughter, but also a stranger. The spoiled, entitled person she'd become during her marriage was gone. Stripped away by divorce and consequences, and the harsh reality of having to support herself for the first time in her adult life. In her place was someone I almost recognized. Someone who reminded me of the girl who used to curl up next to me on the couch and tell me about her dreams. I stopped waiting for other people to give me permission to live, I said finally. I stopped believing that my worth was determined by how much I could give, or how much criticism I could absorb. I started saying no to things that hurt me and yes to things that brought me joy. It sounds so simple when you say it like that. Simple doesn't mean easy. Aurora nodded, tears starting to fall. Mom, I'm so sorry. I'm sorry for every cruel word. Every time I laughed when I should have defended you. Every time I chose Timothy's approval over your dignity. I'm sorry for wasting so many years that we could have spent loving each other instead of hurting each other. The apology hung in the air between us. It was the one I'd waited years to hear. And now that it had finally come, I wasn't sure what to do with it. I believe you, I said carefully. But I need you to understand something. I forgive you because carrying anger is exhausting, and I'm tired of being exhausted. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean going back to the way things were. I understand. Do you? Because if we're going to try to rebuild some kind of relationship, it will be on my terms. I won't be your fallback plan or your source of emergency money or your built-in babysitter. I have my own life now, Aurora. A good life. And I won't give that up to go back to being your emotional punching bag. I don't want that either, she said quickly. I want to know the person you've become. I want to learn from you. I want my children to know their grandmother as she really is, not as the joke we made her into. I sipped my coffee thinking. Outside the window, I could see Robert waiting patiently in his car. We had plans to visit a new gallery downtown, part of the rich, fulfilling life I'd built without my family. Here's what I'm willing to offer, I said finally. We can have dinner once a month. Somewhere neutral, somewhere public. We can talk like adults without rehashing the past or trying to fix everything at once. If those go well, maybe eventually we can try having the children join us. And Timothy? Timothy will never be welcome in my life again. If that's a problem for you, then we don't have anything else to discuss. It's not a problem. I never want to see him again either. I stood up and gathered my purse. I have to go. I have plans. Aurora stood too, looking hopeful but uncertain. So we'll try? The monthly dinners. We'll try, I agreed. But Aurora, understand this. I don't need you anymore. I love you because you're my daughter, but I don't need your love to feel complete. That's the biggest difference between who I was and who I am now. I know. And I'm glad. I'm glad you don't need me because it means that if you choose to have me in your life, it's because you want me there. Not because you're afraid of being alone. I looked at her one more time. This woman who had caused me so much pain but who was also the child I'd rocked to sleep every night for years. Maybe we could find our way back to each other. Maybe we couldn't. But for the first time I was okay with either outcome. Call me next week, I said. We'll set up that dinner. As I walked toward the door, I heard her call after me. Mom? Thank you. For giving me another chance. I paused but didn't turn around. I'm not giving you another chance, Aurora. I'm giving myself one. Outside, Robert smiled as I got into his car. How did it go? It went, I said simply. We'll see what happens next. As we drove toward the gallery, I thought about the woman I'd been 2 years ago. Broken, desperate for scraps of affection from people who saw her as nothing more than a source of money and free labor. That woman was gone, and I didn't mourn her passing. In her place was someone stronger. Someone who knew her own worth and wouldn't settle for less than she deserved. Someone who could choose love without desperation. Who could offer forgiveness without weakness. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in my life I was driving.